Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I am the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. And, we're right in the middle of this college season, Keith. I mean, unofficial though it may be. We've got the action continuing. President's Day invite just happened this past weekend out in San Diego. We've got the Commonwealth Cup coming up in Virginia this weekend, and we're right around the corner from some of the big early March tournaments like Smoky Mountain, Stanford Invite, the first big D3 tournament of the year out in North Carolina, FCS. So lots to be looking forward to. Keith, what's going on?
We're so close to, I think, having almost every top 25 team play. My team is supposed to have a Sunday, like 1 day thing. Although, we have 2 games. So it's like we're going to spend as much time driving as we are playing. But I'm a little concerned because we're supposed to get like a winter storm this weekend. I'm trying to, I've never had to play in the snow. So I'm hoping I won't have to coach in the snow either. But, this is these are the days and times, at least, of college ultimate. We're back in some way, shape, or form.
Personally, I prefer playing in the snow to playing in cold rain.
I don't want to play in cold at all, Charlie. I am terrible also at playing in the cold. Once my hands get cold, I really can't throw, and that's basically all that I offer as a player is throwing. So I really don't need to be disabled in that way.
Speaking of throwing, we got a question over on our Twitter account at Deep Look Pod, if you're ever trying to get in touch with us. And Keith, it references potentially a throw of the future. What is this tweet that we got?
Well, so Sanguine Penguin tweeted this at us and quote tweeted a Matthew Stafford no-look pass from the Los Angeles Rams quarterback in the Super Bowl.
An incredible pass,
which
by the way.
Was a pretty impressive play, I should say. And said 2020 bold Frisbee prediction. 2020s, sorry, this is for the whole decade. Much as the 2010s was the decade of normalizing the offhand backhand, the 2020s are going to be the decade of normalizing no-look passes. What say you? Is that the next frontier of throwing?
Honest to God, I throw some no-look passes at League, mostly like swings from in the zone and stuff like that. So I get to maybe claim myself as an early trendsetter on this. We've also seen a few players use this. John Nethercutt, most notably in my mind, has thrown some pretty nice no looks. And there was that clip from the AUDL championship weekend last year. And now it's escaping me the player that was involved.
It's Elijah Long.
Elijah Long throws a no look. Now it comes back because there was some sort of call. So it didn't count, but it was a beautiful no-look pass. I like the take. I really do like the take. I think there's definitely times in Ultimate where it's advantageous not to fully square up your shoulders and turn your vision and show the defense where you're trying to throw. Now there's risk and reward, obviously, with throwing no look. You also have the opportunity to throw your cutter off if you're throwing to them and they don't think that you're throwing to them. And so you can have miscommunication turnovers. But if people practice this, I think it becomes an actually useful offensive weapon.
How many no-look passes do you think there are in like the average basketball game? Like 0.7? Maybe 1.2?
Less than 1 per game. I mean, I agree with that.
So it's hard for me to ever imagine that this is going to have the frequency enough. I feel like I see offhand throws constantly, sometimes multiple times in a possession. So it's hard for me to quite make them parallels. I think we're probably more likely to see a continued expansion of offhand throws, players diversifying beyond just the high release backhand. We're seeing some of that. I've seen some low release offhand throws on occasion, like no pivot, low release offhand throws. We've seen a couple of scoobers, which I've already gone on record as saying I think that's kind of the next throw that people will start developing is the offhand scoober. So that's more what I would predict as being the direction we go. But it's not like I don't see any utility for no look passes, but I think the risk is fairly high, and the advantage you gain is fairly minimal in most cases. So I have trouble seeing the frequency coming.
I want to go back and actually, I think there's more. I think it's more like 2 to 3 no look passes in most basketball games, because
that's potentially true.
The ones that you think of are when someone is looking that way and then they like throw a bounce pass to the rim, or they throw a lob and they don't look. But there's lots of times where you have a guard drive into the paint and throw to the corner without ever really looking over there. Even
That's
if
fair.
we don't call that a no-look pass in the same sense. I do think that you're right, it's risky, but it's going to proliferate. There's just a lot of times where it's a lot easy. If you square up, like let's say you're on the goal line and you have a cutter, in isolation at the front of the stack, and then you turn around and square up to the dump, like you have an opportunity in that situation a lot of times to throw an offhand backhand into the end zone, no look, and probably catch people sleeping. I just think there's a lot of situations where there's a chance, there's a window, but if you look to the person, you lose the window. It's the same thing you see in basketball. And the entire game of Ultimate is predicated around passing in a way that let's say basketball isn't necessarily. You can move with the ball.
But I think you need to be generating a big advantage for the risk to be worth it. I can see like a swing pass seems like you're generally not going to generate a huge advantage with that. But if, for example, you were looking at your swing and then threw a pass upfield, like through a cup or to the front of the stack, that for me feels like those are more advantageous throws that I could see that risk reward being there. I will say that legendary Paideia coach, Michael Maccarini, used to have an incredible fake huck that he would release really early. So he would not throw it upfield, but instead horizontally for a swing. So he could like wind up a huck and just like fully look like he was launching it, and it would just come out like soft swing throw to the side. That was a very impressive trick throw he used to goof off with, but that was my first experience with that type of throw. We actually I meant to mention, Charlie, that we actually had another social media message to us on Twitter from the William and Mary Men, who included us in their highlight reel. Where I believe it was 2 weeks ago we previewed QCTU, and we were like, who's on William and Mary right now? We don't really know. Well, they took that personally,
as they should.
And I will say, it's a pretty good highlight reel. I watched the whole thing. I felt like compelled, like I had to watch the whole thing after the call out. And it's pretty spicy. Good stuff.
I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Tulane, I meant to bring this up weeks ago and I keep forgetting. Tulane,
we're just rolling into them.
Just roasted me at the end of their little documentary about their 2021 season getting the Nationals. Pulling footage from Deep Look here of me saying that I didn't think that they were going to get the
quite an amusing supercut of you talking trash about them. Hey, look, you can tell they listen to the show because they referenced your fall league team. So
I have a lot of respect, and I as I said on the show, I totally underrated the Southeast. It included Tulane. I'm excited to see what Tulane looks like this season because I'm counting them out again, Keith.
I saw that. I feel like you're underrating them again, but that's
maybe I am. Haven't seen them yet this year, so
hey, they got to prove it.
So let's get on to some other news. Congratulations are in order for the winners of the 2021 Donovan Award. In presentation on Ultiworld's YouTube channel last night, Camille Gu from Puget Sound wins the Women's Donovan Award, and Richmond's Hunter Lang wins the Men's Donovan Award. It is the third player to win from Richmond. So congrats to both of them. And, it was obviously an unusual 2021 season. That's amplified in D3 where, Puget Sound couldn't even practice together, Camille said last night. So it's, of course, a huge honor. It was great to hear from Kelly Donovan's parents once again, who have stayed involved and always had something nice to say to the finalists, either in person or remotely, hoping to be back giving the award out in person at the Division III National Championships coming up in Milwaukee. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the Donovans there.
I love their connection to this. I love that they're still so involved with the presentation. I think that's great. I also can appreciate Richmond. Someone said in our Discord that they changed their name to Donovan U on Twitter, which is pretty good.
Love it. I mean, they've had a great program.
Back to back and 3 total, right?
Coast has a density of D3 teams, and they also seem to have a density of voters in the Donovan. Because they generally Atlantic Coast teams have done quite well in the voting. So
Richmond's done quite well in the standings as it's Puget Sound, and so it goes to show that a strong region has multiple benefits.
That's right. So let's turn our attention to some college action from this past weekend. The President's Day Invite, a 3-day tournament out in San Diego. And, we got to see some teams take the field for the first time, plus the reprise of a number of teams that were competing at the Santa Barbara Invite in LA at the end of January. And on the women's side, UC Santa Barbara getting the win over UCSD, 8-5, the final score. We'll talk about that. And then over in the men's division, Colorado and Cal Poly SLO, as expected, reached the final. And Colorado gets a narrow 1-point win after letting SLO back into the game late. So Colorado getting off to an undefeated start to their season. UCSB also undefeated over in the women's division throughout this 2022 season. So Keith, no surprises on the winners, but lots of interesting results this weekend. What stood out?
Well, the second leg of as our own Graham Gerhardt coins it, the Southwest Triple Crown goes to Santa Barbara. If they can pull it off at Stanford Invite, I believe is the third leg of the Southwest Triple Crown. Santa Barbara Invite, Pres Day, and it's Stanford Invite. So another strong showing for UCSB. I mean, this has kind of become par for the course for them, although it's nice to see them assert themselves when we've had them so close with the other teams in the Southwest. Southwest puts 3 semifinalists into the bracket with UC Davis and UCSD, who lost in that final, as you mentioned. So the Southwest still a tight contingent at the top for the women's division. So that's so far stood out to me. Having that Southwest triumvirate, they still look like fairly close together, although UCSB has kind of asserted themselves a bit over the other two thus far. And the question is, how good is this region going to be when they finally get some competition from other regions across the country?
Well, we got some. We didn't get Washington, but we got Colorado coming over from the South Central, and Colorado did quite well. They went 6-2. They lost by 3 to UCSB. And I think a disappointing result for them is losing by 4 to UC Davis in the quarters. But per Graham Gerhardt's reporting, Colorado looked like one of the best teams there on day one and deserved a semi spot, but the format was kind of weird, and they ended up having to play, 2 of the top 4 teams on their way to trying to get to semis. So that's just the way it shook out. Not that it really means that much in a rankings list season, but Colorado looking really sharp, Keith. And the thing is, I think still the Southwest shows that they still probably are the best region when, you see both Davis and UCSB getting wins over a very strong Colorado team.
Well, we'll see the other regions that we think about, New England, and of course the Northwest. So we've barely seen the Northwest. We did get the debut of Oregon, who really played quite well. They get an 11-6 win over UCLA in quarters, and they make it to semifinals where they lose to Santa Barbara 11-7. But that's a great sign for a program that has certainly fallen from the lofty heights that they were once at, and I think have been easy to write off. But beating UCLA, who has been a bit of a disappointment, but certainly is a quality team nonetheless. That's a great win for Oregon to take home with them. And once we get a chance to see Washington and UBC, who potentially could both be top 10 teams,
True.
Washington could be looks like a top 3-2 team, we were going to assume. So the Northwest could end up being the strongest region when it's all said and done. It's a good start for Oregon, though.
Definitely. I mean, Oregon being back in the mix of being a top 25 team, I mean, that's going to add some strength to the Northwest. I mean, all the years with the Northwest was the powerhouse region back in the 2010s. I mean, it was typically Oregon leading the way. So good to see them back on the train. UCSD continuing to impress. That's the other big takeaway for me. I had Davis getting to the final and actually beating Santa Barbara. Well, I was wrong. They lose to UCSD 9-7 in semis, and then UCSD, again, plays pretty close with UCSB. I just don't think they have the depth to beat that Burning Skirts team, but the top-end talent on that UCSD team, Ava Hanna particularly, just so impressive.
It's hard in the format that we're operating in with these low scores. Like, basically, you have very few opportunities to make a comeback. I take some of this with a grain of salt. When I see a 9-7 result between San Diego and Davis in semifinals, or an 8-5 result in the final, like, I'm not necessarily confident that means that UCSB is 3 points better than UCSD, and that UCSD is 2 points better than Davis. So, I want to see these teams in a more full format.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't have a halftime cap in place, so a lot of games, ended up ending right after halftime. Caps sometimes went on during halftime. It was a 70-minute soft cap and an 80-minute hard cap. So, look, if it's me running this tournament, you got to cut some of the rounds out and stretch them out, or just play longer days. I feel like there's no reason to have soft cap be at 70 minutes especially for games to 15. It's silly. I mean, there's no reason to even say it's a game to 15.
Yeah.
It's never going to be a game to 15. And this was clearly a point of frustration for our reporters out there, Alex Rubin and Graham Gerhardt, who both mentioned it in write-ups, that it was just frustrating to have games end way too early. This seems like a must adjustment for next year for really tournaments across the board, but certainly Pres Day.
Absolutely. And I think this has been something that's been a pattern for Pres Day. So it's time to make the change. Let's get things tightened up over there.
Okay. So let's look over at the men's division. Colorado goes undefeated, mostly pretty comfortable wins for Mama Bird. They did have two very tight games. One with Cal, they won 12-11 in power pools. And then in the final against Cal Poly Slow, they win 11-10. They were up a couple, but gave up a couple late breaks and then had to score on Universe on offense to win the game.
After getting 2 turnovers. So they very much were at the brink.
It was not a clean hold situation down the stretch, which I think is good sign for Cal Poly Slow that they were able to ratchet up that pressure late in the game. But at the end of the day, Colorado does win all their games. They go, I think it's 9-0 over the course of the weekend. And really only had the 2 games where it was a serious contest. So, I mean, we knew Colorado was going to be good, though. I think the thing that stands out to me the most from this weekend, Keith, is that Cal seems to have taken the step forward since SBI and very clearly established themselves as the number 2 team in the Southwest, and a legitimate threat to win the Southwest. They lost to Cal Poly Slow 12-10 in semis. So this Cal team it's going to be a tough out. Andrew Roy is the real deal in the backfield for them, and they have some depth. I think that we could see them making some noise at nationals.
I agree with you. To me, that probably is the biggest story, because I'd say Colorado and Slow mostly performed to my expectations. So, to what degree you find that to be a story, I think Cal Poly Slow looks like they're somewhere in that 7-10 range, and Colorado looks like they're somewhere in the 3-6 range in the power rankings. Like, that seems appropriate for both, and the scores kind of line up with that. Although, Colorado very much, like I said, could have lost that game in the final. But yeah, that makes Cal, to me, one of the most surprising results that we've seen here. And that movement from one tier to another is really important for them when the Southwest has typically been so crowded behind Slow. We had California pretty close to UCLA, and then all these other teams in the region that bubble up from time to time. You don't want to get somebody on the wrong weekend and end up taking an L. It's a good result for Cal, and I'm very curious to see how they'll perform at their next event. The other team that stood out to me was Oregon.
Yeah, sure.
they make it to semifinals. We really didn't know what to expect from this team. It's been a while since we've had a chance to see anything from Ego, but they make it to semifinals. They have to play without probably their two best players in the semifinals, or at least two of their top 7 players, including Silas Cooley, who's probably their most vital player. And so I don't feel like we really got the full story from them in their 15-9 loss to Colorado.
I think the thing about Oregon is that generally they're about where I expected them to be, which is, clearly a top 25 team, but a step behind some of the other top West Coast teams. They lost twice to Cal. They lost to Cal Poly Slow 12-6. They got smacked by Colorado. And sure, you have the caveats, first tournament, missing some players in some of those games. But, this is not the Oregon of a few years ago that we would expect to be winning this tournament pretty comfortably a lot of the time. And, maybe they get a game against Colorado. So the power dynamic has shifted. Oregon is a solid team. They're going to be probably number 2 in the Northwest behind Washington. And that seems like the story to me. Maybe there's growth for them to move up a few spots, but I don't see this team as being anything more than maybe a chance to make quarters at nationals, but they're probably a pre-quarters team.
Shout out Cornell, by the way. Travel across the country, represent the Metro East, win your pool on day 1. Sure, it didn't go so great from there, but
you still got to give them the dubs when they got them.
Absolutely.
For a Metro East team to go out there and get some wins, it's having not really had any time to play outdoors. That's legit.
Plus you're on West Coast time. Come on, it's a big disadvantage.
Okay, I've got to say, Keith, I am a little concerned about UCLA's results.
That's understandable.
They lose bad to Colorado and Slow, and then they also drop games to Oregon, Utah, and Stanford. This is a team that was looking like they were this close to Cal at SBI, and that gulf has seemed to open up a bit. I don't really know whether to be worried about them. They're going to need the Southwest to get 3 bids if they want to go to nationals.
I still think in like a one-off situation, they're pretty dangerous. Yes. I don't think that they're the most deep team, and that doesn't play well in a 9-game tournament or whatever.
Good point.
So I think in a one-off, they're still going to be a dangerous team. But if you're going to catch them at the end of a weekend, maybe at the end of a backdoor bracket or something like that, I think Cal has got to be the favorite.
What do you make of some of these other Southwest teams? We see Stanford for the first time this weekend, and Stanford goes 0-3 in the power pool, but they do get some nice wins. Obviously, the one I just mentioned over UCLA, they beat UCSD twice, dropping a game to Cornell to open the tournament, not the best, and they're not really very competitive with either Colorado or Cal. But is this still a team in the hunt? Let me put it that way.
Potentially, I have a lot of trouble separating these teams after we get past UCLA, and I feel like that Slow Cal UCLA tier, and then you get to everybody else, Yep. So if you break each of those into 3 tiers, and then there's just a glut of UCSB and Stanford and Santa Cruz had some high moments this weekend. What do you do with USC? Like it's crowded. We've seen way too much of this in the past, this parity in the Southwest, for me to think that that's going to disappear at this point.
Utah remains an interesting team. They get a win over UCLA, but they also drop a game to UCSB and USC. Not really sure quite what to make of this team. I think they're going to be inconsistent because of their play style. Super aggressive, hucking, less comfortable working the disc, but I would not want to play them at Northwest Regionals.
They're dangerous, but that sword seems to cut both ways for them.
All right, so let's turn our attention now to the semi-pro leagues, where we now have season schedules for all 3 leagues. We've already seen the Western Ultimate League schedule and discussed that. It's having some of the clustered multi-game weekends, kind of along the lines of the Winter Cup, as we saw before. But we also just got schedules this past week from the AUDL and from the Premier Ultimate League. So why don't we start with the AUDL? 14 weeks, games typically Fridays and Saturdays, much like we saw last year. Believe the streaming plan is going to be similar, where every team is streaming its own games, and you have then 2 games of the week, one on Friday night, one on Saturday night. And there's a divisional realignment, Keith, where we now have the 4 divisions again: South, East, West, and Central, with different numbers of teams. Which is kind of an unusual thing going on in the AUDL right now. The South only has 5 teams, so they've actually changed their mind. And they're only going to give the South 2 playoff spots. The other divisions will all get 3 playoff spots, and do a kind of like a quarters game into the divisional championship game. So schedule's out. We've got some interdivisional games. Thoughts on this year's AUDL schedule and some of the matchups that we're going to see?
I'm very much looking forward to some interdivision competition. It's a little weird, like you mentioned, with the imbalanced divisions that we have, but it'll be nice to have a little comparative when we've had to operate kind of in these separate folds over the past year. It reminds me of how long this schedule is. I mean, this is not a short season per se, but we've got a lot of AUDL games coming up. So I haven't really dug in enough to know exactly which matchups to me jump out. But there's a lot of 150 games or something like that. There's a lot of Ultimate on the way.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy weekend for sure. I'm just taking a look through the schedule right now. I mean, I enjoy the opener. I can say that much. Raleigh, Atlanta. It's going to be the game of the week. And, we get these teams back in the same division again. It was a great rivalry. Both teams went to the playoffs last year. Obviously, Raleigh, now the Carolina Flyers, won the championship. And what a great way to kick it off. Atlanta won't have Antoine Davis anymore, but I still expect them to be a competitive team, particularly early in the season with their defense against Carolina. So should be a fun way to kick things off. 2 of the most exciting teams from 2021. And, the one thing, the interdivisional games, most of them are not super inspiring, and they're also a little imbalanced, which I get it. It's hard. You have to figure out things that make financial sense. But I do look forward to the day where we get a more balanced AUDL schedule. Right now, you can have teams that have to play super tough out of division games against, some great team from another division. That kind of thing can actually actively hurt your chances of making the playoffs. And that does feel a little unfair.
But, you're talking about that opening week schedule. I mean, the games that I'm circling, aside from Atlanta and Carolina now, as it were, you get New York and DC, and we get Austin and Dallas. I mean, those are some juicy matchups.
They know what the people want to see at the beginning of the season. So let me give you the interdivisional games. Minnesota at Dallas. Dallas is going to be a shell of itself this year, by the way. So, Minnesota's got to travel to Dallas, but that's a favorable matchup for Minnesota. Pittsburgh at Tampa Bay. Austin at Chicago. Austin at Madison. Those are back-to-back for Austin.
Ooh.
Tough road trip.
Yeah.
Carolina at Pittsburgh, and Indianapolis at Atlanta.
That's daunting.
I want to see a New York at Raleigh. Give me New York at Carolina.
If you're going to do appealing.
I think the reason that they didn't is that the teams in the Northeast can all play home and away against each other and have a perfect schedule.
And this is potentially another component of the imbalanced divisions. It can kind of create a situation where it's hard to make these out of division schedules aligned.
Right. So you can check out the full schedule on the AUDL website. Some stuff is still not totally finalized. I just heard that the Portland team might end up playing in the MLS Timbers Stadium. That would be something. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that to them.
We've seen the foibles of that in the past.
It's just you got to be in the right size stadium for what your sport is. So then we also got the yesterday we got the Premier Ultimate League schedule, Keith, and they're starting a little sooner than the AUDL, so we got to get ready to go here in April. They start April 2nd and 3rd. The AUDL season begins at the end of April. For the most part, standard stuff from the PUL. They have kind of like a midweek game between the Revolution and the Radiance in May. There's a few weekends with 5 games, some back-to-backs for certain teams at times. It's kind of a mishmash schedule because teams don't play like a set number of games against in-division teams, or they're irregular schedules, which is going to make figuring out playoff spots interesting. Remember, the only full season that we've had for the PUL back in 2019 was determined. The playoffs were determined by the Cody Mills's Frisbee rankings algorithm, basically the USAU algorithm. So I wonder if they'll do something similar this year.
I'll be curious too to hear what they will do. When I look at the schedule, Charlie,
yeah,
thing that jumps out to me is the gridlock schedule. I feel like gridlock getting some nice benefits here, and namely that they twice get teams on potentially pretty good teams on the back end of a back-to-back. They get in week 7. They've got Medellin coming in, and they are going to play a DC first, and then they go to New York. Then in week 10, to close the year, they get Portland, going to DC, and then going to New York. New York has a doubleheader weekend of their own on the road, but they play Indy and then Columbus.
Who have both played earlier in the weekend. So technically, those will also be...
They will also be getting the back end of a back-to-back, sort of. Not quite on Columbus, I guess, presumably will be 2 separate days, but like the Columbus should have a day between... I assume Friday, Sunday. But yes, very favorable schedule for the gridlock.
It is worth noting. Opening weekend, games are going to be Monarchs versus Pride and Raleigh versus Atlanta, the Radiance versus the Soul. So we get the Raleigh Atlanta matchup in both the PUL and the AUDL. That should be a good one too.
I wonder if they'll. I guess they're probably not scheduled at the same time, right? I was gonna say maybe they'll do some sort of doubleheader or something like that. But
that's actually very interesting. It would make a lot of sense to do something like that.
Are they scheduled at the same time?
Different dates.
They're different dates. Okay, I didn't think so. And the return of the Soul. I mean, we didn't see the Soul during the series, so they will be coming back. We also get the debuts of some of the Strike who didn't play in the series. They actually don't play until week 4, which is a bit strange. It's not typical, I would say, for a team to not compete.
You can't have home games in Minneapolis in early April, I don't think.
Right. So they could be on the road during those weeks. I don't know. Fair. But the point is, we'll see their franchise debut in week 4.
Yeah, they got a back-to-back road trip in week 4. They play at home against the DC Shadow in week 5. So you can check out the full schedule. It's up on the Premier Ultimate League social media. I believe it's also up on their website. And so that is the PUL season, again, starting April 2nd and running through June. However, that's not really the biggest PUL news of the week, Keith. The same day that the schedule came out, Ultiworld published an article from Mags Colvett about the PUL and the Milwaukee Monarchs. Summarizing this story in brief is difficult. I would encourage everyone to read the full article. But basically, the Milwaukee Monarchs were considering rostering Clea Poklemba, who was going to be on the team in 2021, but then ended up getting dropped from the roster following the emergence of information about Clea, who had sexual misconduct allegations brought against them. And so they were not on the team in 2021. And then these same set of allegations were filed in USA Ultimate's, I don't want to call it court, but like there was a disciplinary hearings about the same issue. And I can't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago now, Poklemba, who played for the U24 USA national team, was suspended from USAU play for 4 years and also given a lifetime coaching ban. These allegations were brought by Ari Nelson, who made them public a couple weeks ago, which sort of brought this story into the limelight. And so subsequently, the Monarchs were considering rostering Poklemba for the 2022 season. And then when this information went public and some of the players on the Milwaukee Monarchs team were expressing hesitation or discomfort with playing alongside Poklemba, the team ultimately did not offer them a roster spot. And, it became news in the league and in the team. And so, Mags Colvett, associate editor here at Ultiworld, has put together an entire kind of timeline breakdown of everything that happened here. Keith, is that a decent summary? Because I'm trying to pull together all the threads here.
All right. It's so difficult because, really the devil is in the details with this one. It's a lot about who was privy to what information at what time so that you can understand their decision-making process or the issues they're in that others may have with their decision-making process. There are multiple different parties here, but to me, at its crux is the Monarchs players who took issue with the way that the Monarchs management, I'll call them, was handling the potential rostering of this player and communication within the organization. Now, there have been additional questions about how the Premier Ultimate League is monitoring this, what systems they have in place to handle situations like this, what the community's responsibility is to Poklemba and to survivors and other folks in the community needs to feel safe. So there are a lot of questions raised by this. There are a lot of different conversation topics within it. So it's difficult to summarize, but I think you did a decent job.
We're going to talk about it with the Mags coming up next here on Deep Look. So stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Joining us now on the show is Ultiworld Associate Editor Mags Colvett, who has been working on this story about the Monarchs and the PUL, USAU, and sort of the intersection thereof for the last couple of weeks. And their story just came out yesterday on the website. Mags, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Charlie.
So when you kind of have had a chance to think about this story for some time and speak with a lot of people who are involved in one way or another, what stands out to you as kind of the key, most important feature of the story? I mean, there's so many layers to what happened here, whether we're talking about, the appropriate punishment for somebody who commits a grievance and needs to be suspended for some amount of time, or we're talking about the interaction between the USAU and the Premier Ultimate League, or the interaction between the team and the league. There's a lot of angles to look at here. What stands out to you as sort of the most important thing we should be trying to take away from this situation?
I think that if you really zoom out, like the truly 10,000 foot view of the entire situation, the big through line of it is people who make reports of sexual misconduct feeling like they were not on the same page as the people they were making those reports to about what the effects of that would be, and feeling like there was not a clear communication through the different organizations that should be responsible for maintaining this kind of safety throughout Ultimate. And that That's been borne out in the way that the PUL team, the Monarchs, the larger Premier Ultimate League, didn't really have policies in place for dealing with this kind of thing, which meant that folks trying to raise an issue within those organizations didn't quite know what the next steps would be. And that's also borne out in the fact that, USAU and the semi-pro leagues, in this case, the Premier Ultimate League, are these totally separate organizations, technically, even though they are all the same people, all the same sport, feel like sort of part of the same fabric of like the ultimate community and sport experience. But their conduct proceedings are entirely separate. There's nothing that automatically carries over if you've made a report within one organization that will raise a flag for someone in the other organization, unless they learn about it, just because somebody tells them.
To me, that feels like kind of a modern ultimate problem, like something that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. There weren't these kind of silos, these verticals of where you would play ultimate. Like pretty much there was one place people played ultimate. And so what happened there was how things would be handled. And now you have this situation where you have different organizations and people playing with different groups of people, even though as you mentioned, it's still a lot of crossover. Like everybody still knows each other pretty well. For me, that was one of the biggest takeaways is, we haven't had a lot of situations where we're asking questions about what is happening in this space and how does it impact your ultimate experience in this other space. Are there any other takeaways for you that really jumped out? I know you said that was kind of the 10,000 foot view for you, but was there anything that felt like a big takeaway even when you dialed in deeper?
Yeah. This is another very big picture thing before we dial in on any of the details of like how this is handled by particular ultimate organizations. But in conversations about how we handle sexual misconduct or how we handle incidents where someone in a community has done something to someone else in a community that does a lot of harm to them, people use the word accountability a lot. And people who feel that they've been harmed or want to look out for the interests of people who are vulnerable often use that to talk about what expectations do we have of these larger organizations like a PUL team, like USAU. What expectations do we have of them about having a consistent and predictable response when concerning behavior is brought to light? Like if I make a report to this PUL team, can I expect them to take it seriously, probably suspend the player, make sure that there's appropriate communication with everyone around me that like that's what's happened? But on the other hand, if you're in the position of being someone who has done something harmful to somebody, or if you're in the position of running an organization that's supposed to adjudicate this stuff, you may feel that like you've done your due diligence, you've done what's appropriate to take care of this situation. And to you, that feels like I did my accountability bit. And what's so difficult about this stuff is that it kind of has to be a two-way street. It has to be, there has to be a feeling that the people who raised the concerns have had those concerns addressed adequately. And there also has to be a feeling on the other side that there's a set of actions that they can take that has addressed the situation enough, and we can all kind of roll on from there.
Yeah. This gets to me to one of the hearts of the matter. USA Ultimate suspends CLIA for 4 years from USAU leagues and lifetime ban on coaching.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that that's a very long ban for the way that USAU bans often do. We've known of other incidents of pretty serious sexual misconduct that have only resulted in like a 1 or 2 year membership ban and haven't resulted in a lifetime ban of any kind.
Right. And so, I mean, the public details of the allegations and the sort of the findings from USA Ultimate are not public. But, on the other hand, we have the Milwaukee Monarchs, who in 2021, as you reported, decided to not offer a roster spot, effectively creating what you might consider a 1 year suspension. That's the way the team frames it. And I think,
Yeah. In 2021, just to make sure that we have the timeline on this is a player who was on the team and had a contract in effect, but had that contract suspended before the one tournament weekend that was the PUL's like competitive season that year. So for, administrative purposes, that's a 1 season suspension. But for people who raised the concerns and kind of watched how it played out, that's a one weekend suspension that is kind of over within a next couple of months when it becomes time to try out for the 2022 early in the year season.
Yeah, but here's what it gets down to for me that I think, and I'm really curious to get your take on this. Where is the line for like what is an appropriate punishment for, bad behavior? Like there has to be some, like, I think everybody in this situation would probably agree that there is some point at which people can rejoin the ultimate Frisbee world again. And maybe there needs to be some kind of, I don't know, penance paid in some way, or I don't know what the specifics would necessarily need to be for people to be okay with that. But I mean, clearly, like, USAU decided 4 years. Initially, the Monarchs decided 1 year, and players involved in the Monarchs, many of whom may not have any contact with CLIA because they're not in the same communities, right? This PUL team is pulling from all over the place, multiple communities and cities. Even if they're relatively close by geography, that doesn't mean they're necessarily the same at all. So I guess my question is, what is the right line there, and how do you move beyond just saying, well, this person did a bad thing and therefore they should not be allowed to play Frisbee anymore? Because at some point that has to expire and the punishment has to be served, right? We don't want to put people life in ultimate Frisbee prison for, even something that's quite bad. I mean, there has to be some sort of process to get back to reintroducing them into, let's say, Elite Ultimate, right?
Right, yeah. And that is something that Ness Canaday, who's one of the managers of the Monarchs organization, articulates pretty well at the end of the piece, that, certainly no one in this situation, and I would imagine no one on or listening to this podcast, wants to apologize for sexual assault, but we do live in a world where people do that, and, they continue to go on and have lives, and you certainly want to, just from a humane and empathetic standpoint, give them some opportunities to do their due diligence to make it right in the appropriate ways. Take some space from a community if that is a place where people are going to feel uneasy around them for a while. But there should be some kind of path back, right? And it's hard too, because pure punishment, like purely just making someone suffer for the bad thing they did, kind of doesn't help anybody. It may or may not feel satisfying to the people who were assaulted or who were harmed by whatever action. But, at the end of the day, if I assault somebody and then, I have my foot cut off, that doesn't help the person who was hurt by me. That's just me suffering. And maybe that's satisfying to watch for some people, but it doesn't really address the situation. So in the USAU decision, there are some additional steps beyond the suspension that involve things like pursuing and completing particular courses of therapy for people who've done unlawful sexual things. And there is, within the decision, there's a referral to some organizations that do that kind of thing. There's a period after reinstatement where the suspended player needs to share that this decision happened and share that decision with any of the leaders of Ultimate teams that she joins. But there is a clear path from there where we feel like if you take this time away and you complete the steps, we as USAU would consider that a sufficient course of action for you to be someone who we can approve. And, even the lifetime coaching ban, there is a period of several years, I think, after the end of the membership suspension, where that can be appealed on similar grounds of like, can you demonstrate to us that you've continued to be like a good citizen within the Ultimate community and done these steps forward? Then in that case, we'll reconsider lifting that. As someone who's read the decision, and as someone who's, seen the allegations described in the case and the corroboration for those things, personally, I think that is a very fair outcome. And I think that it shows appropriate understanding for what is necessary for a lot of other people in the community to feel safe, as well as understanding that the person who assaulted people has a life ahead of them and certainly has a lot of things that they can do to move forward from that.
This stuff is so complex. It's difficult because there aren't hard black or white lines for there's that takes away a lot of the like simple answers. And when you're working as a group, you may not always be able to come to something that feels the best for everybody, but you have to find a way to compromise. So it's really challenging material to take on. And when I look at what you laid out in this article, I mean, it's a series of events. Like, you really have to understand the timeline in order to really understand what was going on here and what responsibilities people may have had and how those may have been let down, how people may have not lived up to that. When you look at this timeline, when you look at the series of decisions made by people in leadership, primarily it seems like with the Monarchs and the PUL, is there a place here where you feel like things really broke down? Like, is there a specific instance where you felt like things turned in the wrong direction? Or is this truly just kind of a compounding series of events that it's hard to pinpoint one spot?
Well, I think it really gets to what you were saying, Keith, about the difficulties of making these kinds of decisions for a group versus making these kinds of decisions for yourself. I see in this situation, when the Monarchs were coming into their 2022 season and folks on management of that team felt like they understood the facts of the situation. They were familiar with, the accused player's larger story, and they felt that it was not an imminent risk to other people's safety to have this person around. And they felt that, in their role as leaders of an organization, it was appropriate for them to exercise the judgment that it's okay to end what feels like a punishment to this person and go ahead and bring them back into the team. And that's a decision that, they can stand by as leaders. On the other hand, other folks within the Monarchs who were familiar with the investigation felt that, it's not necessarily on you as the leaders of this entire group to make the call that because you think it's a good idea, we think it's a good idea, or we think it's something that we're ready for. And I think that that feeling of having for some players on the Monarchs, their comfort with the situation in general overridden, like, I just don't want to play with this player. It's really hard for me. And then also some people on the Monarchs who just kind of had a different opinion on whether this was the right move for the organization at this time. Like, I don't think this player is an imminent threat, but given that they're under investigation by USAU, we should probably avoid the issue for now. And so that's a conflict that in some cases was expressed in that's a conflict that in some places has kind of come out as an argument about like, well, what's the right thing for us to do as people who live in the world when we learn that someone in our community has harmed somebody else. But there's also kind of that governance angle where, maybe it's appropriate for there to be a distinction between, us as leaders of the Monarchs who also know Clea in this other capacity think that we feel okay with her and we'd like to give her this opportunity to like do this activity that's good for her and provides community and that she's really good at. And on the other hand, you have folks on the team who feel like, yeah, but that's not a call that you should make on those kinds of personal grounds when we feel like there's sort of a social contract in sports where if someone commits certain kinds of infractions on other people's safety, we expect for there to be kind of a longer and harder consequence for that. And that's part of what we signed up for by being in this space. And when you're going against that, maybe for you, that feels like an act of mercy and an act of forgiveness that feels justified based on your relationship with the person. But for us, that feels like breaking the social contract that we agreed to. And that is really disturbing for us.
I'm trying to get a sense. I think reading your piece, my feeling is that they were preparing to roster Clea. And then this information, Ari Nelson went public with the details of the allegation. And that public pressure bubbled up and they changed their mind. And then, we saw all kinds of action steps happening at that point once it went public. The question is that the driving force here, or was it the fact that players on the Monarchs were expressing, at least some players were expressing discontent? And as you note in the piece, players didn't sign their contracts, and held out on signing contracts in part because of this. So was it the public pressure, or was it the pressure internally from the players that started to cause things to change in terms of the thinking about the rostering decision?
Yeah, so the timeline of events is that up through the month or so of January that tryouts are being planned and taking place. Within the Monarchs, you have the folks at the top of the organization. You have Katie Stanton, Ness Canaday, Austin Pruka, Dan Lorela, who are the managers. And temporarily, to start the year, they sign 4 additional players, besides Austin, Katie, and Ness, who are also players, who are not in any kind of like formal organizational leadership role, but are there to consult on roster decisions and weigh in on, how the team should be constructed and the sort of like early team level decisions you make before you have a full roster, but your season is starting to get going. Within that group, and also from players who had been in communication with leadership about the investigation back in 2021, there was a pretty consistent line that we don't think we should roster this player right now, based on some combination of either just on principle, I don't think it's the right thing for us to do, or just given that there's, other conduct proceedings outstanding with another big Ultimate organization right now, it's probably not the right move for us to pursue rostering this player. And up until like the weekend that those spots were being offered, when roster calls were being made, the very last couple of days of January, folks in that group basically felt that they had made their positions clear. And by the time that roster spots were being offered, there's, as described in the article, kind of a standard disclosure that was being made that, we're going to be bringing back on this player who we suspended last year, but the Monarchs organization thinks that's a good idea. We're considering offering them a roster spot. And we just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to talk to us about that situation. Throughout those calls, the line is, we're considering this player for the Monarchs. It was on the table up until the very last weekend before Ari Nelson made her posts that this is someone who there's a possibility that this person gets added to the team. The account that I have from Monarchs leadership is that up until that afternoon, they were considering Clea for the team. She was being considered for the team seriously, without a formal offer having ever been made to Clea this year, which never did happen. Like, there was never a moment where a contract was put in front of her. It is hard for someone external to say whether it was the definite plan that was going to happen or whether it was a possibility that was being kept on the table. But it does seem that it is some combination of the story going public, or, concurrent with that, because that story goes public at the time that a couple of players within the Monarchs feel like it's a definite enough possibility that Clea is going to be rostered that it's time to kind of start sounding alarms. That might also be just the moment that, they were registering that, like, I don't think this is a good idea, please don't do this, feeling clearly enough that really met the qualifications that Monarchs leadership were looking for in order to decide players really don't want us to do this versus just some people would prefer that we did not do this.
We've gotten to the point now, the story's gone out. It took a lot of work to get it there, but it's out, and people have had a chance to take a look at it. We've seen statements from the Monarchs players, a separate group, and from the Premier Ultimate League. Based on what you've seen from the conversations you've had, what's your sense of what happens next from here? Do you have any sense of what might be next for these organizations?
I think that all these organizations are in a pretty difficult spot in that they got to get going on running their season. The PUL has this veneer of being a national league that's sort of seems like a larger institution than it is sometimes, but like a lot of things in Ultimate, it is a small number of largely volunteers who are doing things with very limited time. So it's the same people who have had to kind of step in and run the response to this Monarchs incident, who would otherwise be like pulling the levers and pressing buttons to like get their season that starts in April, going. So, I don't know what kind of movement we would see from them or from the like Monarchs team management, in part because it is the deadline for them to start making plans for how the next season is going to work. Based on what's been stated by the PUL and by the Monarchs organization and by the Monarchs players, it looks like everyone has every intent of proceeding with the season right now. The PUL just released its schedule. The Monarchs have a bunch of games on it. And it certainly seems like everyone wants to go ahead and make all of those things happen. What happens procedurally from now, I'm not totally sure. One big gap that the PUL has highlighted and taken ownership of in a lot of its statements is we never really had clear policies for how you would report some kind of conduct issue. The Monarchs didn't really have that as a team, and the PUL didn't really have that as a league. They have said that they are working on establishing a much clearer set of places to go and people to talk to and things you can expect to happen next when you need to report some kind of conduct issue. And, I would expect them to follow through on that. It's certainly tough that stuff didn't exist before, but it's also common for all kinds of organizations, and especially organizations that are running on a very small group of people who do everything and are always at maximum capacity, which is a lot of organizations in Ultimate. Very, very often, you don't really have a system in place for handling this kind of stuff until it's too late and you already need one, and then you're scrambling. That's the place that certainly the Monarchs and certainly the PUL have found themselves in now. And I think the hardest pressure on them at this moment is to take care of that and demonstrate to people that they've done so.
So as we kind of look to the future, I guess, are there things that then organizations need to do vis-a-vis one another to make this better? Because obviously USA Ultimate has its internal processes for handling player disciplinary measures. They have the publicly posted suspensions page, and there's a lot of rules about this kind of stuff when it comes to sports governing bodies and nonprofits, and like they have their whole process. But that information is not being shared whatsoever with, let's say, the PUL, or a similar situation actually played out in the AUDL last season, where a player who'd been suspended from USA Ultimate was discovered by the Raleigh Flyers. Raleigh Flyers ended up, cutting this player and ending their contract with the team. But this information didn't come out until on social media. So is there a way to make this better? And does it need to get made better?
Yeah, I mean, the AUDL incident is a big red flag that we are dropping the ball on some stuff as a sport, because that is a situation where the USAU suspension had already been handed down and was public. Like, if someone, in management on the Raleigh Flyers had happened to look at the USAU page, they could go up there and see that player's full name is suspended from USAU play and USAU coaching for like a couple of years at this point. And that would, at least be a signal to you that you should probably look into what's going on there. With this situation, with the Monarch situation, there are some sort of procedural ins and outs that I am not the person who can speak to authoritatively, where I'm not sure how much information can or should be shared between organizations while something is in process. But it does seem like it's appropriate for there to be some kind of flag that, an investigation is happening. It seems like if there's a good way to make some kind of bridge between these different organizations governing Ultimate about when there is some kind of flag for concern, that would certainly be helpful in preventing a lot of this stuff from happening. Because, and I say this in the piece, but it's just really striking to me the more that I think about it. With this Monarch situation, you really see the disconnect between the different governing bodies in the sport going both ways, where back in 2021, CLIA had been suspended from the Monarchs, had been investigated, had, those allegations found credible by the people who looked into them and heard from a couple of witnesses about it. But, then goes on to play a complete USAU season, make semis at nationals, try out and then make Team USA for Beach World, which ended up getting canceled. And then, during the USAU investigation and hearing into those same incidents with many of the same witnesses, even before the member suspension was handed down, when someone's being investigated like that, their USAU account is temporarily suspended. But that was during the time that Monarchs tryouts were happening and when this player, had a very realistic chance of making that team. So we have this person who at different times has been suspended from different organizations, but has continued to play, without any technical official, there's a policy about this issue while this stuff was going on.
For me, I think the logistics and the potential, I guess, legal questions about how this would work cross-organizationally. I don't think we're going to see a database anytime soon or anything like that. And this is a real-world problem as well for any of this type of information or other pertinent information that has to travel across states and stuff like that. So one thing that I can imagine is instead organizations asking people ahead of time, if you're going to try out or you're going to sign a contract within our league or something like that, a question that says have you been suspended by another major Ultimate organization, or are you under investigation for something that could result in suspension? I could see that sort of logistical solution providing kind of cover and a system where these kinds of things are brought to light so that people can make appropriate decisions, as opposed to, it's hard for me to think of a way that USA Ultimate is going to share their investigation information, or it seems all that's pretty close to the chest right now for them, and I understand why. So I don't see that being a cross-organizational thing, but I can see that being asked of people. So you're forced to say one way or the other, here's what my situation is, here's what my past looks like.
Yeah. And, I think it's important, too, that whatever solutions we try to implement going forward are realistically implementable by all the mostly pretty small organizations who are running stuff in Ultimate. From USAU on down, every organization involved here is a small group of people who are pretty overworked and are largely, not people who are specifically qualified or experts in managing these kinds of issues. And, it would be great if we were able every time to bring people in who do have that kind of expertise, but it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen imminently, even in the pro leagues, even at USAU. It's certainly not going to happen imminently on the local Discord level where this stuff happens too. So it's trying to figure out some kind of way to address this stuff that sets expectations for everybody involved that can be realistically fulfilled as much as anything.
All right, Mags. Well, thank you so much for your reporting on this story and your insight here today.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take good care.
Appreciate you coming on.
Of course.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we look ahead to this weekend's Commonwealth Cup. Stay with us. Welcome back to Deep Look. Thanks again to Mags Colvett for coming on. Really appreciate getting their perspective, Keith. It's like a multi-week reporting thing on a really difficult topic. It's a lot to sift through, and I think they did a great job of kind of putting the pieces all together and allowing people to make their own assessments about, what happened here and maybe what the right next steps are.
Agreed. Great reporting on their part, and glad that they were able to get all that done when it was such a difficult assignment, but many difficult questions to follow, and I think people are starting to wrestle with those after reading the piece.
Coming up this weekend is the second weekend of the Commonwealth Cup, which brings together a lot of teams. I mean, I think there's 24 teams there this weekend. 12 of those teams are in power pools. This is in the women's division. And number one, UNC will be the top seed and certainly the team that's expected to take down the win this weekend. Particularly, the next teams are Pittsburgh, Chicago, a strangely number 4 seeded Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia. So lots of teams taking the field for the first time this weekend. Also lots of teams we just saw at Queen City 2 weeks ago. So another chance for East Coast teams to kind of see where they stand as we head into the second half of the season.
And Charlie, what's got my eye? Number 24 seed Cornell. A chance for me to see some Metro East teams in action. I'm kidding. I mean, as a coach, I do have my eye on that sort of thing. But you look at this field, and we do get a chance to see some teams that we haven't had a chance to see yet. And that's one of the main things. I just want to be able to get everybody on record so we know what everybody's capable of. Northeastern and Chicago, both teams that are well within our top 25, we think are nationally competitive. We'll also get a chance to see Dartmouth as well. And a second chance to see a Georgia team that I felt like we didn't really get a fair shake. We didn't get a representative sample of them without Marie Prouvier. So hopefully she's able to play with them this weekend. But look, it's North Carolina's tournament to lose. What do we had them at roughly around 45 point for how many points they would give up over under for the weekend. They exceeded that. Like, they may not give up double-digit goals all weekend.
It's very plausible. They had a tough matchup with Georgia at Nationals. Mm-hmm. And so we'll get a rematch there, which could be interesting. I still think UNC is the much better team, particularly playing in a situation where they didn't need to win the Nationals game. So that always changes the mentality a little bit, I think. Dartmouth, interesting to see this team that's been a powerhouse program not even get into the power pools, Keith. They are number 13, the last team out of the power pools. I fully expect them to make the bracket. The question is, how far will they go? Does Dartmouth have a chance to play into the top 25 this weekend?
If they play well, like if they get those shots at good teams, then I do think so. I do harbor some reticence to be super excited because typically I feel like teams have an input on which of these groups they're in, which might lead me to think that Dartmouth either might not have their full complement or they don't think they're ready to play in power pools. They don't think it meets their needs. So that would be a little bit concerning for me. Although I still don't know how teams could all come together, look at Ohio State's results from Queen City Tuna and be like, they should be the 4 seed. So I don't know what's going on here. Also, Northeastern's the 11th seed. Come on. What are we doing? Another New England team, though. All the New England teams, they played well in the women's division. They've played well in the men's division. There's something going on right now. So with that in mind, maybe I should just buy the Dartmouth stock now while the price is low.
Well, that Pool B is pretty interesting. Pittsburgh, Michigan, Ohio, Northeastern. A couple of the other power pools, I think, have a weaker team or two in them. But those are all like solid teams. Mm-hmm. I expect Pittsburgh to come out on top there. I hope to see Pittsburgh maybe play a little bit better against the top teams than we saw at Queen City. They got smashed by Vermont and Tufts. And so they get some, good matchups here in this pool. To feel confident about them going towards nationals, I think I need to see them go 3-0 here.
Don't forget App State. They lost that game to App State, but
I'm not taking away from App State.
Hopefully with Jesse's son, who's on the roster for the weekend, maybe they can put up some better results. But I do think a bit of a disappointing Queen City tune-up. So they're going to be looking for a rebound. And you're right, they have a fairly tough pool. No incompetent opponents that they'll get free ones over. And I'm very curious to see what Northeastern gives, and this also provides a great litmus test, these 3 teams, for where Northeastern is at to start the season. I'm also like, I don't want to completely write off some of the Nationals teams that we might have. UPenn and Virginia. Virginia had a tough Queen City tune-up as well. They also have they have Purdue, who's usually a regionally strong team. Chicago, who we have really high hopes for. So Virginia a chance to bounce back, and UPenn, like we mentioned, a nationals team last year. What can they build upon from that experience? They earned their way there. They didn't just fluke their way into it. They beat an Ohio team we felt like was pretty solid. So they probably went into nationals thinking about how can we be the best we want to for 2022. So they're going to have a shot to make a statement to start the season.
This is an interesting tournament because you got UNC number 1 in the rankings. And then you got to go all the way down to 15 for Pittsburgh. Then you have 16 Chicago, 17 Northeastern, 18 Georgia. And who else is in the field? Dartmouth. I'm sorry. Dartmouth's actually in that top 25 right now.
Just barely, right?
Barely. They're at number 24 and Ohio at number 25. So, we'll see. Dartmouth still a question mark. Feels like a question mark. But, you have UNC and then a big drop off down to everybody else. Whoever comes out of that everybody else to make the finals, I'm watching for that. I think it could be Chicago. That's probably who I'm picking to make the final, Keith.
Look, Charlie, you could have North Carolina at nationals, and it may be a big drop off from them to everybody else in the field. Like, we just don't know. I mean, they're damn good. Although, will they have Karen Earhart? Anworth, like we talked about, has not been able to play with them yet. So Earhart is not on the roster. So they're pretty much rocking with the same crew, I think, from Kuwait City Tune-Up, and we'll see how they've changed because that takes away a bit from their ceiling, I think. I don't think Washington's going to be an easy pushover as their potential rival or Carleton. Maybe there's a chance they stumble. Like if they played a double game point with Chicago or Pittsburgh or something like that, maybe we start to look at them a little differently.
100%. I mean, and look, if Anworth and Karen Earhart don't end up playing, this is a different team. You look at it differently. They're still probably the best team, but they suddenly become more of like a coin flip against a team like Washington instead of a 5-point favorite.
Right.
And so it's something to keep an eye on.
Want to get to picks?
Let's get to picks. I'm taking UNC. You heard it here first. I'm going UNC versus Chicago in the final. Give me UNC.
I'm going to assume that the seeding is going to hold up in some way by the time we get to semifinals. There's some sort of crossovers, but that doesn't involve the top pools. So let me just make sure that UNC is on the opposite side.
They are.
Well, so that is a challenge for your situation because if Chicago wins their pool, are they also okay? They're also on the opposite side of the bracket.
Yeah.
All right, good. I'm going to take Pittsburgh. Losing to North Carolina in the final. So I will also take UNC and I'll have Pittsburgh in the final and go with the chalk.
Makes sense. All right. That tournament happening this weekend, and it is down in Axton, Virginia, a classic college ultimate locale. Coming up soon, we've got all the big tournaments at the beginning of March. Stanford Invite, Smoky Mountain Invite, FCS D3 Tune-Up. We'll be getting you ready for those in next week's show. So hope if any disc golf fans out there, enjoy the start of the disc golf season today at the Las Vegas Challenge. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.